Yeah. So welcome to all. Welcome to this first episode, literally, of the Professor Iyer show. That's my show on the area of defense, economy, and defense security. Our core focus in this is tooth-to-tail preparedness for deterrence as well as for defense security of India. And we have today three wonderful personas. We have Lieutenant Colonel Manoj Channan with us, who is a defense veteran and a man who has served our defense forces beautifully. And he has very innovative ideas. He's one of the top defense professionals in the country, a voice who is heard about in the sector and in the media. And we have K. Srikumar, a man who has defense training. His father was in the Airforce, and he has also been involved in some way in the defense sector and is an, I would say, both the naval architecture and also in areas like instrumentation. He has been very strong, and he thinks there is a good scope for SME sector in defense. So that's where Sri comes from, the technology side. And we have PVSN Murty, who served Voith Hydro for many years, and he's also part of our defense and Marine Biz advisory board. So welcome to all three of you. And since Manoj Channan Saab has only the first half with us, then we both will continue in the second half. I will wish to start the program with him. And of course, he's the best one to fire the salvo. Today's
and I'll just, Professor, before we start, I forgot to tell Manoj Saab about the OFIL cameras that we equipped for Indian Air Force. Yeah, basically, so like I brought in a lot of Israeli UV cameras, and UV cameras have a specialty that it can capture the UV signal from the plume of a missile in 3 seconds, right? Whereas infrared takes about 5 to 6 minutes. So though we were representing the camera for the different application, the DRDO got interested in this in Bangalore. And then subsequently, we went to Tel Aviv and got customized cameras that were made for Indian Air Force planes as well as civilian planes. And it's a constant surveillance which happens whenever there is any missile activity, because in 3 seconds, you can capture the launch of a missile. And these cameras are only made by the Israeli company called OFIL. And he also, the chief of OFIL happens to be a fighter pilot itself. So I was involved in the supply of something like 4,000 OFIL cameras for defense applications way back in 2003, 2004. And include the chief of Indian Air Force had come there during that same period. I was bracketed as a technical consultant at that time. And that's an old story. But that's how my passion comes for defense, and that's how, I'm involved in this whole story. Thanks, Professor.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. We have a lot of opportunity because this is just my first episodes, and we will continue, if possible, every week. We are trying to do that. With this, I begin my first salvo to Manoj Channan Saab. Manoj Channan Saab, the first question is, India's defense budget is just $60 billion US. And most of it, almost 70% to even sometimes 80%, goes towards payment of salaries and other administrative costs of maintaining this defense, very large defense forces and infrastructure together. So we have only a levy of about $15 to $20 billion, which is by any standards in the world, nowhere capable of tackling even common wars, So we are now facing neighborhood China, a very belligerent neighbor, with a budget of $280 to $300 billion. Now, I want you to first stress from this factor that how, with such a meager budget, unless we have $100 billion to $115 billion budget per annum in the defense sector, how are we going to tide over this whole situation? Because we are not probably arming our defense personnel enough and giving them enough resources, and the sector itself enough resources to make it happen, to really tackle this China threat. Channan Saab.
Good afternoon to you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and then I look forward to the discussions today and, of course, in the weeks ahead. Coming to the question that Professor Iyer has posed to me about the defense budget allocation, he's very well brought out the facts that majority of our budget is going in for the upkeep of the armed forces. That is basically, you can call it that, it goes into a revenue expenditure, and capital acquisition expenditures are very, very limited. Having said that, it is also important to bring out the fact that we as a nation have not really given defense a major priority. If you look back post our independence, at the time, the then Prime Minister, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, felt that the defense forces were really not required for India because we were a peaceful, non-aligned country and we would not wage war against any of our neighbors. Till 1948, we had the jihadis come across who ventured into that time Kashmir, which has now partially been recovered and partially it is now known as Pakistan occupied Kashmir by us and what the Pakistanis call as the Azad Kashmir. We have to also understand one basic fact that defense is not a subject which is entirely to be dealt by the service personnel. It is based on what your political leadership decides, that what is going to be its strategy and what it wants India to be in the years ahead. Very often you may have heard that the Chinese over the last at least 4 to 5 decades have been enunciating and telling the world as to what their goals are and how they have restructured the complete armed forces of China. And they have also brought in technological changes and they've ensured that there is a budgetary support which is provided to ensure that the aims that they have set for themselves are achieved. As we speak, even today, there's an article that has been published by a former Army Commander, General H.S. Panag, on the theaterization of commands, in which he has again brought out a very pertinent point that you see, a presentation was made to the Raksha Mantri on 10th of June, in which not only were the 3 service chiefs were present, but also the officials or the bureaucracy from the finance ministry, as well as from the home ministry were present, because it is an entire concept in which everything is involved. But unfortunately, I think the meeting did not progress very well and they have gone back to the drawing board, which means that you are restarting the entire process, which was supposed to have been pre-decided. When I say pre-decided, the government has to spell out for itself as to what terms of reference that it wants to spell out, based on which you create a mission statement, which unfortunately has never been done. Just for the information of my colleagues on this show, there is a document that is prepared by the Army headquarters every year, and it is presented to the Raksha Mantri, who probably acknowledges its receipt, but hardly gets time to read it. We won't go into the reasons of why he doesn't do it. It is left to everybody's own imagination. Now, coming further to the current situation, we, in the acquisition process, as you understand, the service headquarters decides among the 3 services what are the priority items it needs. And based on that, a presentation is made to the Defense Acquisition Council, which is headed by the Raksha Mantri, and you have all service representatives present, in which approvals are given, supported by budgetary support. So every now and then you may be hearing head-breaking news that the DAC has approved so many 1,000 crores worth of approvals have been allocated, but that has been happening since 2014. And till date, if you understand, very little orders have percolated down. Where and how and why is this happening remains a political imbroglio, which we really don't know and don't understand outside. Yes, rationality of the PLA intrusions along the LAC, the Chinese pandemic that has hit us since last year and is again and again troubling us with now the 3rd wave anticipated sometime in September, October. The budget allocations for various other things have been reappropriated, and all focus is now on fighting the COVID battle, which is really causing a lot of loss to us across the board, across all sectors. It is not limited to the defense only. To come to some sort of an answer as to how do we bridge this gap, it is to be understood that in the next couple of years, the budgetary allocations to the services are going to be very, very limited on the main rationality that we have to fight the pandemic. We also have to provide for the weak and the poor in this country. Yet we also have to keep at an arm's length a belligerent neighbor like China. So how do we overcome it? It won't come by procuring our platforms, whether it be land, air, or marine, through government to government sales, but developing them in-house. Now, in-house procedures are very much sort of talked about, but when you look at it, hardly anything has been done. Let me give you a few examples. The last 5 to 6 years, India and Indian companies have developed artillery guns, which have been put through the paces of their trials, approved. Induction of some guns have also taken place. But thereafter, we suddenly do a turnaround and we place an order of 4,000 artillery guns with the Israelis to say that we need this as of yesterday because we have a problem at hand. We started with the Tejas and also a trainer aircraft by HAL. It had its problems, it overcame it, and now, as we understand that the Tejas Mark 1 has been successfully operationalized, and Tejas Mark 2, which would be a better version than the Mark 1, is also now on the drawing board and it's likely to be worked upon.
Right.
The same time, if you take your mind back, we used to have the Pilatus as our training aircraft, which we imported. And there was a strong lobby which stopped the HTT-40 training aircraft's production in India. But again, by sheer will or bureaucracy or whatever, the HTT-40 is now an approved training aircraft for the Indian Air Force and for all the sea services. If you look at it historically, it is actually the Navy which ever since independence had invested in its naval contractors or naval architecture and sent officers abroad way back in the early 60s or late 50s to train them on the design and development of naval ships. Today, I think Indian Navy should be very proud to say that majority of its platforms are made in India. As we speak, through public sources, we are aware that we have a nuclear submarine being manufactured at one of the docks. We have an aircraft carrier also being made. Yes, what we need to import and develop is the electronic suites that are required, which is a shortcoming so far, but I'm sure it can be overcome. How it can be overcome is, as I indicated in one of my recent articles that I wrote on how to stop the Chinese bullying us around, is that we need to revamp our DRDO. We need to revamp the way we think within the services. We have highly qualified officers who have done their masters in technology in various specialities. But the military secretary's branch, which is responsible for the career progression of an officer, does not probably give it more weightage to the educational or the professional qualification of these officers and employs them in routine military duties which can be handled by the others. Now, these people who have done their specialization from various IITs or Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, they're all from A-class institutes which are world-renowned. They need to now work on these technologies and do the research and development, which should ably be supported by the government. Today, the support by the government is very, very limited. As you must be aware, there is a Project Gita, there is a Technology Development Fund. These are primarily for the problem statements which are published by the Army Design Bureau, in which the problems are being faced. They want local vendors to come. They want them to produce or innovate. For that, the government gives about 10 crore rupees. 1 crore is to be invested by the uh, project developer, and 9 is what is supported by the government. But that's not the end of the tunnel. The end of the tunnel is that if that R&D, when fully developed, or the technology is fully developed, is transformed into orders, which unfortunately we talk about a lot of Atmanirbhar, but no Atmanirbhar is happening today because we have a quick fix solution. It is, for example, just to quote from historical perspective, when we had the 99 of Vijay intrusion in Kargil, that time the Army Chief General Malik made a very profound statement. He said, we will fight with what we have. Unfortunately, you ask General Manoj Narwane today as to what will he have to say, he will probably make the same statement that we will fight with what we have. Because we do not learn our lessons, we do not really take into consideration the various committees that are formed post such disasters that hit us, but they remain confined to files. We think that personal equations at the international level are economic and huge markets will force countries to look at it as from a different perspective, which really is not the truth. Power flows from the barrel of the gun and it has to be done accordingly. We have very ambitious plans. We make very bold statements, but we do not support it by the budgetary allocation that need to be done. And for that, what needs is what Mr. Manohar Parrikar did very well was, he said, instead of trying to take a very huge bite, you focus on the small issues that really bring about a technological change and gives you a better wherewithal to fight with. Make those budget allocations, make sure that you have a timeline to it, make sure you get through to it. Unfortunately, Goa politics took him away, and of course, cancer really took him away from all of us. And we've had ministers past that. But unfortunately, those ministers have been, not very proactive as Mr. Manohar Parrikar was. I've attended many seminars with him, and I've personally interacted with him on a number of occasions. He was one gentleman who would remember the file reference when you spoke to him of an issue that you were facing with the Ministry of Defense. And in one particular case, at the one of the seminars, one of the gentlemen in that huge gathering stood up and he said, "Sir, I need to question you on one thing." He says, "Tell me." He says, "Sir, I wrote a letter to your headquarters to say that I have the following problems and there has been no response." You'll be very happy to hear that the minister could immediately respond to him on the spot. He says, "I've replied to your letter 15 days ago. Let me check in the meanwhile as to why that letter has not reached you. Otherwise, you're most welcome to come and see us and collect it by hand after this seminar." Now, that proactive was he as a Minister for Defense. Unfortunately, probably Mr. Fernandes was there earlier in the earlier days, was probably more proactive.
Definitely, I would, sir, like you to talk about George Fernandes because it's a very important topic we spoke some time back. See, all these 60 border roads, the kind of initiative taken by him, that's only given us some evening with China at this point of time, in spite of the kind of pressure that's coming on Ladakh. So why don't we talk about George Fernandes' great relationship with Atalji, and you have seen all that time. I know a lot of work was done during George's time also. Probably goes down as one of the best defense minister India ever produced.
So to quote a very good example of Mr. George Fernandes was that there was a requirement at Siachen of certain items, which the bureaucracy was not willing to move forward on. And I happen to know the brigade commander those days, who was commanding the 102 Siachen Brigade. He refused to accept second-hand clothing or equipment that is required for the super high altitudes of 25,000 feet and above. You can understand that anybody who's serving there is inducted for about 3 to 6 months, and he does not take off those clothes for those 6 months. So it is not acceptable to tell somebody to wear somebody else's used clothing. It's not hygienic, it's not acceptable to us. So when this issue was flagged to Mr. George Fernandes, he made the bureaucratic officers fly to Siachen and stay there to understand what the challenges were, to ensure that no further shortcomings would ever occur. Bureaucracy has its way. They got back to him with the coffin scam, which I think was something very, very foolish to do. We all know he was a simple man, lived out of 2 kurta pajamas from a jhola. He didn't have any requirements. He could eat in a hotel. He could eat at a roadside juggi. It made no difference to him. A simple guy. So, and the other thing which I want to bring out is, you see, Mr. Fernandes may have initiated the process of the infrastructure development, which started probably in the year 99-2000.
Right.
India, fortunately, did a sensible thing of keeping quiet about it. We don't have to go banging pots and pans and telling the world as to what we are doing.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, some of our political leadership has been a little immature in making statements. When you abrogate Article 370 and you go to the Parliament of India and make a statement, today we abrogated Article 370, tomorrow we're going to capture Exai and what was there as ours, or we will recapture POK. Now, these are fine to be made in election rallies, in all other areas. But when you do it at the floor of the parliament, everybody is going to listen to you with a lot of seriousness. And that is what I think the Chinese heard very seriously. And you would be aware, this happened on 5th of August, 2019 and 2000, same, I think within a week, Mr. Jaishankar was asked to fly to Beijing to explain to the Chinese leadership that what we really meant. Well, I think the Chinese showed their hand to us in May 2020, and they would like to ensure that the CPEC road from their Xinjiang district down to Gwadar port is not disturbed. And they have invested more than $5 billion in Pakistan's infrastructure. Pakistan is a vassal state of theirs. It will not be very long that I hope it never happens, but you may find that the PLA may be soon on your western borders. If it continues the way it is, the Chinese are continuing in Nepal, you may find them against our Terai belt in the north. And in any case, the Chinese are proactive in Myanmar today, so you have a situation which is bothering us that side also. There are reports that now that the Chinese have created a EEZ in Sri Lanka with about 240-50 acres of land, which is going to be having thousands of Chinese present out there. So you have approximately the Chinese roughly about 290 kilometers from your southern tip. So if you see, the Chinese are all around us. It is the elephant in the room, and that is what needs to be addressed. Pakistan can and will continue to create problems which are more related to terrorist activities in J&K, and those have to be handled and will be handled. So to sum up, in a way, it would be best to say that what a senior Western Army commander sort of mentioned in a brief interaction, that we keep having. He said, we have to contain situations that occur at the border, be it skirmishes with the Chinese or with the Pakistanis. Right. We are not going to get
any budgetary support in the near future. And if at all any deterrence is there, it is because of a nuclear embargo that we have. Briefly touching on a few other subjects that you had mentioned about the Quad. Quad is a nice diplomatic initiative which has been started to put an end to China's One Belt, One Road and whatever it wants to do, the BRI, initiative that it's got. The Chinese are well aware that if they were to go with One Belt, One Road, they are trying to overcome one major strategic disadvantage that they have is that they do not control the seas. The seas are controlled by Western naval powers, and therefore they needed to do One Belt, One Road to overcome that. Quad was to reinforce the fact that we will not allow the sea lines of communications to be available to the Chinese, and therefore, once the four nations that are part of it today, from a lot of countries from the European Union to join in and be part of it, is currently limited to just being a diplomatic initiative. Right. It is not a military capable platform which can take on the PLA. Notwithstanding that, there are a lot of exercises that are being carried out by the Indians with the US Navy, with the Japanese, the Australians, and the others who keep coming around to be showing their presence in the environment. But the disadvantage is that when military alliances like NATO were made or Warsaw Pact was made, there was a lot of commonality of platforms, weapon systems, communications, logistics, which ensured that you had a similar fighting capability and delivery against the enemy wherever he came. Unfortunately, today we don't have that. It is a part, it's a mix. It's not a very professional mixture of combination of forces.
2 minutes.
When we look at Quad, it has to be understood from that perspective.
Right.
And another thing which one has to really understand is, firstly, Quad remains a diplomatic initiative. Quad is not there to support India for its challenges with China. That, unfortunately, is a battle we have to fight ourselves. It's very nice when people from Israel or other countries make bold statements that they are with India, they will stand with India in case China does something, and words to that effect. Ultimately, it is that humble soldier with his 5.56 INSAS weapon or the new US Army rifle that we've got. He's got to fight with that. Rest of the big thing that we keep talking about is really not what matters. So we have to make sure that the guy who's on the ground, he is adequately armed, he is adequately protected, his basic creature comfort needs are looked after, and he is kept motivated in the manner that the Indian Defence Forces are at all times to fight against all odds. The Galwan incident, which happened on 15th of June last year, you are well aware that the Chinese were there and they were looking for picking up a fight. One was that you could easily stay away and say that, okay, we allow you to do what you wish to do. Other was to go and confront and meet them man to man to say that this is what is ours and you cannot and will not be here. They're falling back to
Channan sir, we have about 3 minutes or 2 minutes.
Era weapon systems and trying to sort of get moral ascendancy over the Indian army was a very, very sad experience for them. It was sad for us also because we also lost a few boys, including an officer. But that's part of the game. When you are confronting a belligerent enemy, they do test you out To quote you an
Right, sir.
example of a very dear friend of
We have-
mine
we
who
have-
was commanding
Channan sir,
20
just a minute.
division.
Channan sir, just 1 minute.
I can't hear you.
Hello, Channan sir, just a minute. We have few
Just a
minutes in this because we have to go through another link if we have to continue. So I feel we need to come back to that link again. If we take a 1-minute break, because your discussion is fine, but if you can join us, or otherwise we can always have another show. There's no issues. Okay, we have only 2 minutes left in this link now. And we can continue the same link if we can come back, if all of us decide to do that.
Sorry, I lost your audio for some time. Can you just repeat it, please?
No, we are on the verge of the end of this link in the program. So we can come back on the same link in another 1 minute or 2 minutes. We have to
Okay.
just log in into the same link.
Yeah, not a problem. So what
Okay,
I was saying is that, sorry, it just disturbed my thought process, but what I was saying about Galwan was that, you see, after Galwan has happened, and once we did a quid pro quo, and we gathered, captured the heights, or we occupied the heights of the Kailash range, which allowed us to look into their eastern Ladakh garrison of Moldo, which actually brought in a bit of a, let's say, unhappiness in the PLA leadership that the Indians had really beaten them at their own game.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, when you look at the Depsang Plains, the Chinese have not withdrawn and they continue to occupy that. And they dominate the heights. And it is something which is very disturbing for us because that actually is threatening our supply chain to the Siachen Brigade. And Siachen, as you are aware, is the water table for the subcontinent. And anybody who wants to control the water table today is the one who is going to control what the economy is all about.
Absolutely right.
So these are some things and some thoughts that I had, which I thought I would mention to you.
Yeah, now we will come back in another 1 minute. And I think if I would only request Channan Sahib continues to be there, then we can complete the whole